All right, good morning, everyone, officially. Welcome to Friday, the best day of the week, of the school week anyway. Saturday's pretty good. Sunday's not great though, right? Because on Sunday you start thinking about...
Monday's like the worst.
Yeah, Monday's the worst.
Yes, Monday and Tuesday is the worst day.
Monday and Tuesday are bad.
Monday till Friday is the worst.
Monday, just that whole block. I find Thursday's pretty bad too because people are kind of tired from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but it's still not Friday. So Thursday's kind of like, oh, is this week ever going to end? You know?
Sir, the best day for me is Friday night.
Friday night?
Yeah.
Yep, Friday night's pretty good. Friday night is pretty good. Pretty good.
Wednesday is pretty. No, Sunday pretty. Not really that good.
No, the first half of Sunday's good. But then the second half is like, homework.
The best day is like when we're having a holiday on Friday and we have a break on Saturday and Sunday.
And then you have to what?
And then we have a break on Sunday and Sunday. And if we have a break on Friday.
Yeah. That's the best. But I don't think we have any more. Let's see. We don't have any more long weekends though. We have
Next week we have
we have Thursday off.
Well, at least we have a day
Yeah, we have a day off. It'd be better if it was Monday or Friday, but
off. Yes.
what can you do, right? You can't move Remembrance Day. It's the day that the war ended. Good morning. It's the day the war ended. You can't move that. Okay. Let's start here. So, good morning, Kayla, by the way. Okay. So, talking about Qin Dynasty here in China, right? The Qin is kind of at the end of the Warring States period. So we have a few dynasties before it, the Xia, the Shang, and the Zhou, and then things kind of fall apart, right? And kingdoms are fighting with each other for a few hundred years before they're finally brought under the control of one emperor again, right? And we met that emperor, the emperor of Qin, right? We saw this movie yesterday in which that was kind of acted out for us. So this Qin king named Ying Zheng, who finally managed to unite all of the kingdoms of China under his control, right? We also saw him, well, give me a quick recap of some of the things that we saw in that film. Quick recap. What's that? Yeah, we saw people living in structures, simple farming houses, but also large palaces. What else? Mm-hmm. The what? The kings. So we saw. I finished chewing here. We saw education, right? We saw people teaching words and phrases and things to younger children. We saw the emperor's quest for eternal life, right? So in the documentary they said, Qin had conquered every enemy except death, and now he wanted to sort of conquer death as well, right? So he went out on the road looking for the secret of immortality, right? And I was thinking yesterday, I think Chen and I were talking, but it's kind of interesting how there's a bit of a pattern, right? Because Qin here, has every success, right? He accomplishes all his goals. He's wildly rich. He has everything he could possibly want. And he goes off in search of something more, right? Something elusive. In this case, it's immortality. But if you remember in India, Chandragupta Maurya did the same thing, right? He was the first emperor of the Mauryan Dynasty of India, right? The grandfather of Ashoka. And he too kind of went off later in his career after he had accomplished everything, looking for forgiveness, right? Looking to somehow kind of cleanse his soul from all of the bad things he had done, right? And I couldn't help but think of, these names come up a lot in this class, I don't know why, but I couldn't help but think of guys like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, right? These guys have like had so much success and so much money, and now they're kind of like going off into space, right? They're shooting themselves into space looking for, I don't know what they're looking for, right? But I feel like there's this pattern of people who have kind of have every success and are wildly rich and have everything, and then eventually they kind of get tired of that and they go off in search of something greater, right? Or maybe something that they can't even achieve, right? Like immortality. But I don't know. I kind of, when we were watching the film yesterday, I was thinking about Qin in the same way as, maybe Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. I don't know. I don't know if you think that's a reasonable comparison or not, but seemed interesting. What else did we see? Just give me three more things that we saw in the movie about anything. They don't what?
Build thousands of those soldiers out of clay.
Oh yeah.
That the king, when he died, like he believed there is an eternal life after that, and that soldiers will protect him as he on the afterlife.
Right. So we saw the construction of a very elaborate tomb for the emperor after he dies, with thousands of clay soldiers all standing at attention, right, ready for him to lead into some sort of afterlife, right? So pretty amazing archaeological discovery, but also pretty clear evidence that the emperor thinks that there's a life after death, right? Death is not the end. He's going to go somewhere else, right? Whether it's a paradise or whether it's some sort of other world, who knows what they were thinking. Well, I guess we know what they were thinking, but he clearly believed that there was something after, right, that he was going to need his army for. What else did we see? Two more things. Right, so we saw an alchemist, and we also saw lots of different types of technology, right, from clothing to musical instruments to weapons to plows, writing implements, all kinds of things, right? Carts, things you use with horses. Kang, what were you going to say? Oh, yeah, we saw the emperor bury a bunch of people alive, right? Oof. Awful, right? But yeah, the ancient world was a brutal world, right? It was a violent one. One more thing. What's that? Man-made. Oh yeah, that tomb that the emperor was in was a man-made hill, right? So they moved enough dirt to create this giant hill under which the emperor was buried, right? Interesting. Okay, so we saw lots and lots of things in there. What I would like you to do now is just read these few pages on Han Dynasty. Okay, so because the Qin Dynasty won't be around for very long, and it'll be replaced by rulers from the kingdom of Han. And Han Dynasty is one that will last quite a bit longer, and it has pretty significant consequences for kind of laying the foundations of Chinese culture and the Chinese state, right? So Zhou is important, Qin is important, but Han is also important, okay? So I've got a few questions for you here. How does Han Dynasty begin? What is the society kind of like? How does the empire govern itself? Confucius is back. How do the ideas of Confucius become integrated into the empire? So interesting that Confucius thought he had failed, right? And now here, hundreds of years later, his ideas are going to be popularized. And then the Silk Road. What's the Silk Road? Okay. So just a few questions for you. I'll put some time on the clock. How much time do we need there, Felicia? 15? Deal. I'll put 15 minutes on the clock, unless my software isn't working. Oh, there it is. Okay. I'll put 15 minutes on the clock if I can. Nope. That is not working. Okay. So I'll just do that 3 times, I suppose. All right, I'll let you start reading, and then we'll talk about the answer to these questions. I'll give you 15 minutes. Yeah, just ignore the clock. That's not working right now. I'll try a different clock. No, that's not working either. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, let's read. Is the page number okay? Or not so much? 134. Huh? Victoria, are you okay? Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry. It's 4.9. It's 4.9. Yeah. So yeah, start at 4.9 on page 134. Sorry about that. us a couple more minutes, guys, and then we'll talk. 2 or 3 more minutes. Sorry, my little countdown timer doesn't work. I don't know what's going on there, but. Okay, good people, you ready? Almost? 1 more minute? 2 more? Okay, 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. Okay, here we go. So, how does this Han Dynasty begin? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So we kind of have, again, this is this is kind of the problem with ancient empires is they're often put together by one guy who goes around conquering everyone, and everyone's scared of him, and nobody's going to rebel against him. But then when he dies, people immediately start pushing back, and if you don't have a strong leader, the whole thing falls apart, right? And so there's lots of there's lots of examples of ancient empires that are put together by kind of one guy, and then as soon as he dies, the whole thing falls apart pretty quickly, right? And here with the Emperor of Qin, that pretty much happens, right? So we have, yeah.
They come from two at East and the East Dynasty and the West Dynasty.
Well,
90% of the people are farmers and they live instead of the city. 10% of the population, it's about 6 million people.
okay.
They live in the city and they work for the government. Some of them are soldiers and some of them are like business.
Okay. Okay. Is that number 2 you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Hang on to that for a second, though. So, yeah. So often these things fall apart really quickly, and we almost have like a little mini warring states period, right? Everything kind of is, the power is kind of decentralized. Everyone's starting to say, oh, maybe I can conquer all of China. But as Felicia mentions, it's Liu Bang who's going to do it, right? He's going to get an army behind him. He's going to get all the sort of kingdoms of China under his control and kind of establish himself as an emperor with a new dynasty, right? Han Dynasty. So, what was Han society like? So, as Arya told us, most people are farmers, right? There are some cities, but pretty much, the vast majority of people live in the countryside, right, and are probably simple farmers. But there are kind of soldiers and sort of government ministers and other people kind of living in here. What else do we know about Han society? Sorry, they were divided by?
Divided into Western Han and Eastern Han.
Right. Okay. I think that's more of a historical period. Yeah, well, that's sort of describing the Han Dynasty in general, right? So they've kind of the Han kings or the Han emperors are in charge for about 400 years, and historians have kind of broken it into 2 periods: the Western period and the Eastern period. So Western and Eastern doesn't really describe geography; it describes a time period in which things are happening, right? And yeah, we have 24, which is pretty good. A series of 24 emperors from the same family, kind of basically one after the other, which is pretty stable for an imperial dynasty, right? Except for that one in-law who manages to seize power, but we don't need to worry about him.
Within the Han Dynasty, because the people were under the pressure of the government for the taxes, for the
Yeah.
mandatory army, they become to each other and make a good army,
Yeah.
and they can win the government and begin a Han Dynasty.
Yeah, so that's the other thing too, is people weren't exactly happy under Qin, right? They felt it was kind of a really heavy-handed, brutal government, right, with harsh punishments and high taxes. And of course, nobody's going to challenge the first emperor of Qin, right, because everyone's afraid of him. But his successors, right, his 18th son, people aren't really too afraid of him, right? And they'll push back, especially if they don't feel they're being treated well and taxes are high. And yeah, if they're not happy, they'll rebel, right? So yeah, that leads to that whole decentralization of power and people starting to fight again until Liu Bang manages to unite everyone again, right? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, because the different kingdoms, the different kind of people who are high up in government start to think, if I could just kill him and knock him out of my way and get him to do what I want, I could rule the whole thing, right? So it's, have you ever heard of the concept of a power vacuum? You know what a vacuum is in science, right? Not the thing you clean the carpets with, but when you have a vacuum, you have a space with nothing in it, right? No air, that's a vacuum, right? So a power vacuum is where there was a powerful figure and now the powerful figure is gone, right? But people will kind of rush in to fill that space, right? Just like if you have a vacuum with no air and you open it up, the air will rush in, right? And similarly, if you have a powerful figure like the first emperor of Qin, and then he vanishes, people will try to rush in and sort of gain power for themselves, right? And that's kind of what happens here. Okay, so Han society, most people are living in the countryside, most people are farmers, but there are other people doing other things, right? Craftspeople, what's that?
Like there's a landlordism between like major social
Oh yeah.
political problems.
I don't have a question about landlordism, but what's that about?
Where like local great families probably would ever even more the dependent poor undermine the system of other.
Yeah, so can you kind of explain that in your own words, why this sort of landlordism thing starts to be bad for the rulers and for everybody?
It feels like the rulers were kind of like more into like the independent farmers.
Yeah.
And like the more the landlordism like became like a major thing in the society, like farmers become more dependent as farmers and it like it affect their government.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, originally the government likes independent farmers, right? They farm, they're trying to sort of keep their family from starving, they're paying their taxes. If you need an army, that's where your army is coming from, these simple independent farmers. But they say here as time goes on, economic times are not great. People wind up having to sell their farms or sell themselves into debt slavery. And the rich people who owned a little bit of land start to own more and more, right? And more and more and more. And again, that's not good, right? Because as these guys get more powerful and more rich, it gets more difficult to tax them. It gets more difficult to get them to do what you say, right? They become too powerful. And without getting too political, I almost think that's what the United States is dealing with, where there's people that are so rich and so powerful, they kind of get what they want at the expense of the country and at the expense of just regular people. And so here we have a similar thing happening, right? You can expect lots of taxes from independent farmers, you can call on them for your army, but if all of them are in the service of some super rich guy, now you've got to get the super rich guy to go along with what you want, right? And that's much more difficult, right? Because super rich guys want to do what super rich guys want to do. So yeah, it becomes kind of an issue for them. What's the Han society governance like? How do they govern themselves?
It was ruled by 24 emperors.
Right? So we have 24 emperors over about 400 years.
Generation to generation.
Yep.
Imperial family.
Yep. We have that. What else? How else do they kind of govern themselves?
By a highly organized state and its parts of allocate the original social systems
Say that last part one more time.
Civil service.
Right. So they have a pretty complicated government structure, right? With kind of local authorities taking care of local matters. They're kind of taking their orders from commanders, right? From sort of middle level people. They're getting their orders from government ministers, and the government ministers are getting their orders from the emperor himself, right? There's two chancellors in there too, I guess. So it's kind of a multi-level system, right? And so, again, this is really good for administering a modern state, right? You need to distribute decision making, right? You need to give a little bit of your authority to people lower than you so that they can do the work of ruling, right? You can't make every decision as the emperor, right? You'll never get anything done. So you spread out your power and influence, you create rules and structure, and and that's exactly what they kind of do in the Han period here. They're building on what Qin did before, but it's kind of more elaborate, right? And it really looks like a modern state, right? This is the ancient world still, but this government really looks like a modern state, right? And again, it's 2,700 years ago, right? But they've figured out how to create a government and to run it. We also hear about our friend Confucius, right? Confucius is back. We said that unfortunately when he died, he felt like he was a failure, right? He had, worked hard to try to influence kings and change society, but on his deathbed he said, "No wise king emerges. I have failed," right? But he hasn't failed, because what happens here in Han?
Confucian scholars criticize the Qin governing for Legitimize. Like Han saw the benefit of Confucian ideas to govern.
Okay.
So started to during his reign, Confucius' idea were molded into an ideology that legitimized monarchy and
Hierarchy? Okay. Victoria, did you want to add to that? No, you're okay? So the idea here is, if you're the boss, how do you get people to do what you want them to do? What can you do? If you have a bunch of people and you need to tell them what to do and you want them to do it, how can you make sure that they do it? What's that? You can pay, okay. You can pay them, right? If you want to use a fancy word, you can incentivize them. Right? So hang on. So you can pay them, right? You can incentivize them. You can give them a reward if they do what you want. You can offer punishment, right? If you don't do what I say, consequences, right? Right. You can use religion, right? The first characteristic of religion is that, not the first characteristic, but I think maybe the fourth or fifth one, is that you can use religion to legitimize your authority, right? It's not me saying it. This is from the gods, right? The gods command you to do this. So you kind of have to do it, right? So yeah, you can appeal to a higher power, right? You can try to legitimize yourself through the gods. What else can you do? Rewards, punishment. You can invoke the gods. You get the burden of
Taking a decision, making a decision.
oh yeah. Okay, yeah. You can put that on the god. But how do you get people to do what you want?
Mandate.
What's that? Mandate? What about mandate?
From heaven.
Okay. Well, that just means I have the power to rule, right?
Yes.
The gods have given me the power to do. Okay? You can try, I guess this is the Ashoka pathway, right? You can try to rule through respect and reason and persuasion, right? Trying to convince people that the thing you want them to do is a good thing and that we should do it. Yeah, you can try and persuade them.
The best way is to teach the rules as a behavior, the values to the new generation.
Yeah.
You learn them as your child, then they will accept it.
Yeah. So what you can also do that Aryan suggests here, you control ideology, right? You teach people an ideology. You teach them a way of thinking and behaving that is in alignment with what you want them to do, right? And Confucianism works really well, right? Because Confucianism is all about respect for other people. It's about doing the right thing. It's about respect for your elders and your parents. Confucius, of course, wanted us to think of the emperor as a father, right? And of course, we all owe our parents respect and honor and obeyance, right? We need to obey our parents. And so for the Han emperors, this was perfect, right? This is a perfect ideology that teaches people to do good, to behave themselves, and to honor those above them, right? And to do what they say, right? So this is a very useful thing for the Han emperors to support, right? And so, I kind of feel good about this, then that, Confucius kind of got exactly what he wanted, right? The rulers started to build Confucian schools, right? They started to train people in Confucian thought. And people who, wanted to be government ministers had to be recommended by their teachers because they were good people, right? People who practiced Confucian values were people with humanity. They were people with Ren, right? And so all of a sudden, getting a government post wasn't about being a noble person with a fancy name or being rich or having, political connections. It was about people with humanity, right? People who were good people. That is what got you moved up in society, right? And so people started taking those Confucian teachings very seriously, because if you wanted to move up in society, you had to be a good Confucian, right? You had to practice the values, right? You had to practice the rituals. You had to do things correctly, right? And Confucius, of course, thought that if you did all those things, it would actually make you a better person anyway, right? So the Han Dynasty, and I don't know if it worked that way, but the Han Dynasty kind of uses this to help get people to do what they want. And, it kind of works its way into the culture, right? It becomes part of how people see the world, right? And how they think they should behave, right? Their social behaviors and norms are kind of dictated by Confucius's ideas, right? And fortunately for them, he had lots and lots and lots of ideas, right? That was the complaint. He has so many ideas it'll take you more than a lifetime to learn them all, right? But there was lots and lots to be learned, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing here. And again, that's the trick, right? Is that if you're a leader, you have to figure out how to get people to do what you want them to do. And you can reward them, you can punish them, you can try to persuade them, or you build in a system where doing the right thing benefits them, right? And here the Han actually managed to do that. Being a good Confucian and being a good citizen and a good subject of the emperor actually can help you out, right? It can help you kind of rise up the social ladder. Not about being rich, it's not about what family you belong to, it's about how good of a citizen are you, which is pretty smart, right? It's very, very smart. Okay, last question, then we'll take a break. What's the Silk Road?
It's from Central Asia.
It's what?
From Central Asia.
It's in Central Asia, and what's the kind of point of it?
Can I say?
Yeah.
At first, I think the name is Xun, something like that. The emperor, well, like the place in Central Asia, in I think east of China,
Yeah.
and he's going to like get friend with the emperor of that place in Asia,
Yeah.
and to like send the goods and take the goods, something like that. And the first goods, I think they trade it is like silk, kind of silk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of the point of that, it was the goods. It was the best way for the traders to trade the goods. And also they can maybe they can share the culture in this way, from the different cultures,
Yeah.
see the people who different governments. But
Yeah.
the best point is that they can trade the goods.
Certainly, yeah. It's all of those things, but yeah, it's mostly a trade route, right? And so, if you look here, you'll see that, Han China is not all of modern China, right? Modern China is much bigger than this, but they're trying to, in the western part of the empire, they're trying to fight off these nomads, right? These pastoralists that are on horseback, and so they're trying to sort of keep them out of the western part of the empire. And so once they kind of get over there and set up some military outposts just to keep these people out, they also notice that there's a trade route kind of going through, right? And that trade route is going to be good for them, because the more trade you have, the more money that you make, right? And so here, not that it wasn't connected before, but Han Dynasty kings create a more solid trade connection between the East and the West, right? And it's really interesting to think that, here 25 or 2,700 years ago, you could actually travel from Rome, right? You could be, amongst the Romans, right, and Julius Caesar and all that stuff, and you could travel the road all the way through the Middle East and through the Persian Empire and the Parthian Empire, and you could eventually find yourself in ancient China, right? And so these areas that are thought of as really, really separate, and at one point they kind of were separate, but now they're connected, right? People in ancient China, Liu Bang, he probably knew about Rome, right? He probably knew that Rome was an empire in the East. He might have even traded with Rome or possessed things that came from Rome, right? And similarly, the rich Romans might have had silk that was made in China, right? And so it's very interesting to think about, again, globalization is usually thought of as a modern thing, but to some degree it was already present here 2,500 years ago, as people are moving along this Silk Road and trading with each other, right? And learning from each other, right? Having sort of a cultural exchange, but also, there's business happening along here too, right? And again, long time ago, but very similar to what we do today. Okie dokie, artichoke. You want to take a break? Okay, let's take a little break. When we come back, I think we will tie up China, okay? All right. So, just as a quick review here. So again, the Qin Dynasty kind of ends very quickly after its first emperor dies. Again, people rebel. They don't really like living under Qin rule. And we almost get a mini sort of warring states period happening for a very short time until Liu Bang gets an army together, conquers everyone again, and establishes himself as the first Han Dynasty emperor. There he is. He's a handsome devil, as you can tell.
So he's just like a normal villager, you know?
He's just like a regular guy.
Yeah, like a villager, farmers.
Yeah, regular guy, charismatic, inspiring, gets a bunch of people behind him, makes it happen, right? Look at that little hat. People had little hats back in ancient China, I guess. It's like, hello, nice to meet you. No, never mind. So that's Liu Bang, right? He sets himself up as the first Han emperor. We know that societal-wise, most people were farmers, although there were some other craftsmen around and sort of government officials and so on. We heard some numbers, that's true. We talked a little bit about Han governance that I won't sort of repeat because we just talked about it. And we also heard about the reintegration, well, not reintegration, but the first time integration of Confucian ideas into Chinese society as a whole, right? So the Han emperors realized that this is a useful system for getting people to behave the way that they want them to, and so they start to set up Confucian schools and support those schools and reward people who do well in those schools with government positions, right? And so Confucian ideas get sort of worked into the operation of the empire and into Chinese kind of culture and society as well, right? So very useful for the Han, and I mean, not a bad ideology, right? If you're gonna integrate an ideology into your culture, one that's based on respect and humanity and honor of your parents, that's probably not a bad thing, right? What's that? I think it kind of sticks. I think it kind of stays as part of people's as part of people's kind of culture and way of doing things, as far as I know. So that's Imperial Confucianism. I won't go into all of that. We talked about the Silk Road, and there it is. And so just in kind of closing here, again, we have kind of another example of an empire, right? And so the Mauryan Empire under Chandragupta and Bindusara and Ashoka. Here we have some Chinese empires under a number of different dynasties. We have the Roman Empire, which we haven't talked about, but we will. We have the Persian Empire that we didn't talk about and we won't. All of these are kind of, again, new political organizations as well, right? Kings who not only rule their kingdom, but they seek to control other kingdoms and other areas as well, right? And so in this period, we have lots of these little empires set up, and these empires are kind of I guess they're the first version of a real modern state, right? With bureaucracies and civil services and court systems and currencies and standard weights and measures and all of that stuff, right? And so it's not quite, an empire isn't quite the same as a modern country, but it's kind of on its way to becoming one. And again, we see the first empires ever created, for the most part, here in this period. So, to summarize China, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes, talk amongst yourselves, and come up with as many things as you can that we've talked about with regard to China and these things, okay? So the movie we just watched, but don't forget the documentary on Confucius, don't forget Taoism, don't forget the Zhou and the Shang and the Jia and the oracle bones and all that stuff. What's that? Shang Dynasty was the first dynasty of China, but might have been mythical, might have been made up, or might not have, we're not sure. So, just going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to think and refresh your memories, and then we'll try to talk about what we've learned under these categories, and then we'll call it a day, okay? 3 minutes. I was going to give it to you today, but I'm going to give it to you on Monday instead because I'm still writing the topics. So I've got to figure out what the topics will be, and I'm still working on those. I've got everything else pretty much organized, but I want to be able to tell you what direction you're going to go in, so I'm still working on that.
Sir, read all of the lessons from first.
I'll tell you on Monday, but no. I'm thinking you'll be able to work in pairs if you so choose. You can work in pairs or alone. Your choice. Two minutes. One minute. All right. So, tell me what we know about China culture interacting with environment. Agriculture. So this is an agricultural community, right? Or civilization, I guess we should say. What else?
Oh, the different weather, because like they're in like a bit time, they're it's colder.
Right. So ancient China is a, well, and modern China too, it's a big place, right? So there's lots of different geography, different climates. Some places it's very warm and humid and wet. Some places it's very cool and dry. Yeah, it's kind of a mix, right? What else? They just what?
We just follow one river. We have just only one.
Okay. Does that relate to the environment though? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. What else? What else has to do with environment? We had two rivers that were important. Yellow and yellow's in the north, and the blue river. No. Green. Green. No. Green river. Purple. No. It's not. What's that? Yangtze. Right? So Yangtze in the south, yellow in the north, right? Two important river systems. Let's see, they were growing wheat and millet in the north because it was kind of cooler and drier. They were growing more rice in the south because it was warmer and wetter, right? The rice likes warmer and wet. Maybe that's it? Okay. What about, well, lots about politics and power, and what were some of the things that we talked about? Different systems, right? So what kind of things?
Different dynasty has different system with their with their government.
Right.
And like
In Qin, they use like 5 as a unit.
In Qin, they.
They use 5 as a unit to measure the population.
Sorry, say that one more time.
So like they use 5 houses.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
5 families as a unit to measure the population to rule them.
Right. So we saw Qin Dynasty kind of organize people into units of 5 families, right? We saw that.
in Zhou they believe in Taoism, and there's also like about Confucius ideology that came in Qin Dynasty.
Right? So there's these Taoist ideologies and Confucian ideologies, and of course the Confucian one gets worked into the government in Han Dynasty. Good. What else?
When they send out empires to rule different regions.
In Zhou, right? Yeah. So in the Zhou period, there was that kinship feudalism thing where they sent out relatives of the king to rule other kingdoms. Yeah.
When the king died, the next king was chosen from his son.
Right? So these dynasties are kind of built on usually father-son relationships, right? The father is the emperor, he dies, and then usually his son becomes the king, right? Or sometimes nephew if he doesn't have a son, but then it gets kind of dicey. Right. Lots of these dynasties are founded on the mandate of heaven, right? They're in charge not because they have sharp swords and they defeated everyone else, but it's because they were given this power to rule by heaven, right? They were given this mandate. Good. What else? So as things went along, the government became more complex and yeah. So these as the dynasties go on, governments become more complex. they become better at kind of administrating and kind of doing the job of government? Yeah, they do. They get better at that for sure. This whole thing is kind of based on something that Shang Yang developed. It was called, started with an L. Is that an L? Not loser. Legalism, yeah. Legalism. So the idea that, you can't just rely on the emperor to keep making decisions. You have to create some sort of legal structure, right? So that the empire can kind of run itself. So that's Shang Yang's kind of innovation from the Zhou period. But of course, other empires or other emperors will use it as well to develop that government system, like we talked about. Anything else? Power, authority, governance, social hierarchy, right? There is one, right? Interactions and exchanges. Silk Road, right? Yeah, so these empires are connected with each other and trading, probably before the Silk Road, but certainly once that Silk Road is more established, more people start to trade, right? Especially when the Han emperors are protecting their part of it, right? If you're a merchant and you've got a bunch of wagon loads of expensive goods, sounds like it would be kind of dangerous to drag it all the way through unguarded territory, right? You'd have people trying to rob you all the way along. But if it's protected by an empire, whether it's the Romans or the Persians or the Han Chinese, then yeah, it's a little bit safer, right? If you have protection. And so once that road is established and protected, it's really good for business, because then merchants can feel comfortable about traveling the road and they're not going to get robbed and murdered, right? Interactions and exchanges. Yeah, okay. Anything, maybe the only other thing we could sneak in there is that Buddhism comes to China after this point, right? So we haven't really talked about it, but that's an interaction, right? As Buddhism finds its way from India into China and then it spreads. We didn't really talk about it, but I'll fly it in there. Conflicts. Warring State period. Yeah, so lots of military conflicts, right? Particularly during the Warring States period, and some wars kind of before and after that point too, right? Most things seem to be solved through warfare and violence still, right? Let's see, values and beliefs. Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, right? The ancestors, right? The role of people's ancestors in their lives and honoring those ancestors even after death, right? The importance of the father and son relationship, right? Very important and still important in China today. The two kind of great cosmic forces. The two cosmic forces that are always locked in combat with each other. Dragon and the phoenix, right? The sky and the earth, right? And the human's role is to try to keep the balance, right? With ritual. Cultural expressions. What? Yeah, we saw some marriages. We saw a marriage take place. We heard songs and music performed on various instruments. We saw some dance. We saw some celebrations, right? The coronation of Qin, all those drums beating. What else did we see? What, the horns? Oh yeah, right? When something important is about to happen and you want everyone to pay attention. Right? or whatever. Yep, very true. I guess clothing could be a cultural expression as well, right? We saw lots of kind of very interesting clothing being worn in the film, which was supposed to be authentic, right? Was supposed to be how it looked back then. Yeah, the colors red and gold being very kind of important and significant, right? Even hundreds or thousands of years ago, those colors are still, are still an important. They still have meaning, right? They still have important meaning. Maybe those Shang Bronzes. I know I showed them to you just very quickly. I just did a Google search and put them up on the screen. Those are cultural expressions as well. Anything else? Oh, right. Soldiers made out of clay for the tomb of the emperor, right? Those are cultural expressions and a value and belief, right, in some kind of afterlife for the emperor, right? Whew. Man, we learned a lot. We're so smart now, right? Don't you feel so smart? I do. I feel super smart. Okay, so I will end it there. Have a nice weekend. Have a nice weekend. Relax, chill out. I'll see you Monday. All right? All right. Bye-bye. See you.